MarkRogersTV running through as many positional units across the country as we can possibly get to. We stop in the Big Ten at a surprise team for 2015, Northwestern. We bring in Zach Pereles from Inside NU to help us break down the quarterback position. Zach, it's always a good discussion. You got a quarterback situation where I guess the bottom line is that it was impressive for Clayton Thorson to step in as a freshman and win 10 games and get you to top 15 status in the country at the end of the regular season. But if you look at the passing game, it was pretty much in shambles and extremely limited last year. You're going to need more than like 120 yards per game passing this year.
Yeah, Northwestern, I believe, was the second worst non-option offense as far as passing the ball last year. And yeah, you mentioned it. Pat Fitzgerald mentioned it a ton of times. The only stat that he really cares about is 10 wins, and that's what Clayton Thorson gave this team. Unfortunately, he didn't really have, one, the wide receivers, but two, he was just not quite good enough last year. Struggled with accuracy issues, struggled when his protection broke down. He really struggled to find his receivers. But then again, his receivers also struggled a lot throughout the year with drops. And just couldn't really get open. So they've done some things at wide receiver to help themselves improve, and then Thorson as well as has improved this offseason. His first offseason as the starter, I think that's really going to help his confidence.
So what kind of quarterback ceiling do we think Thorson has? Of course, he should be able to take a freshman season, as you just alluded to, and add to it with more support at wide receiver and just understanding the offense and making better decisions. But how good could he possibly be? Maybe not just this year, but down the road.
He certainly has all the physical tools. You look at a guy that's 6'4", probably 220, maybe even 230, 40 pounds. And he can move for a big guy. Obviously, he had rushes of 68 and 49 yards in the first half alone against Nebraska. Had a 42-yard touchdown against Stanford. He's a big guy, but he can move. He's got a strong arm. He's just got to really work on his accuracy. That's really been his biggest issue. His wide receivers definitely didn't help him out, but there were just times where he missed open guys. He would and there were a lot of miscommunications as well, which was interesting. You'll see that a lot with a young team, and obviously Thorson's a young guy, and a lot of his wide receivers were pretty young. But he's really got to work on that accuracy. His timing was not great either. The biggest thing that you'll see from his freshman year to his sophomore year, though, is going to be his recognition of defenses, I think. Obviously, players talk about the game gets so much faster at each level, and the last level that he played at before this year was the high school level. So the game should begin to slow down for him. He'll be able to recognize defenses better, be able to make more accurate reads, switch out of plays that he doesn't like. That really wasn't something that you saw him do a lot of last year. He really just went with what play was called, even if it really wasn't a play suited to work well against the defensive alignment.
Zach, as you know, if you look at the game log, nothing's going to stand out that's that impressive statistically. He threw for 256 against Ball State in a pretty close win at home early in the season. That was his most prolific game with 3 touchdown passes. But even against the really, really strong defensive teams, some of the best defensive teams in the country, Tennessee, Michigan, Iowa, he at least didn't turn it over. Didn't have a game more than 2 interceptions, just a couple times in a couple games. The Duke victory, he had 2 picks. They really didn't need him because of what they did on defense and special teams. So Clayton Thorson, 7 touchdowns, 9 picks, 51%, kind of speaks to what you said about him needing to hone in on those receivers, get more help from the wide receivers, plus be more accurate, definitely. All right, Zach Pereles from Inside NU helping us out with the Wildcats at quarterback. Can you kind of set us up after Thorson in regards to what you have backing him up?
Yeah, Thorson actually pretty incredibly started all 13 games, which you usually don't see out of a lot of quarterbacks, and especially freshman quarterbacks. But he was benched a couple times throughout the season. Obviously, in the blowouts, they're not going to play him once it gets into the late third, fourth quarter. but he was also benched during like normal playing time against Purdue. Came out, and Zach Oliver had to come in. Zach Oliver is now gone. So behind him, they have a former 4-star recruit named Matt Alviti. Matt has battled a lot of injuries, hip problems, a lot of just lower body issues. But he is actually healthy for the first time. Pat Fitzgerald was saying probably for the first time in his Northwestern career, completely healthy. He's also a dual threat, but he's probably maybe 6 feet if you're being generous, and hasn't really developed quite as much as a passer. But again, has some skill, can really use his legs. He would be the primary backup. And then behind him, you have probably Lloyd Yates, another good athlete, dual threat guy. And I mean, if you're gonna appoint like a third string battle, then you'd also throw TJ Green in there, who's the son of Trent Green, actually. So TJ Green is probably, he looked really good actually in spring practices throwing the ball, but he's probably 5'10", 5'11", doesn't really have the frame to be a quarterback, but did look good throwing the ball.
Okay. Also have Aidan Smith, who we talked about before we came on here, probably going to redshirt in 2016, top 40 pocket passer out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. You mentioned Yates. He was rated as a top 40 dual threat quarterback out of Oak Park, Illinois. All right, Northwestern looking to get better in the passing game this fall. It's never going to be the calling card for this offense, but they've got to get better to stay in contention in the Big Ten West. Zach Pereles from Inside NU helping us out at the quarterback position for the Wildcats. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for having me.